what that means is that very soon there'll be a shortage of good diesel vehicles on the used market. Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel. Now, whilst we would largely concentrate on petrol powered performance vehicles here, I know, like me, a lot of you guys do a lot of mileage in diesel cars, and that's because they're better on fuel and they can make really good value used cars because they're more durable at higher mileages. Plus, if they're like this GTD, they can still be really good to drive, and also if they're Euro 6 compliant, just like every Mark 7 or 7.5 GTD, you can drive in clean air zones in the UK and not be charged for doing so. In fact, I think they're probably one of the most environmentally friendly cars you can buy if you look at the complete life cycle of the vehicle, but unfortunately the government doesn't do that. They look at tailpipe emissions, and as a result they're deterring company car drivers from buying diesels, instead incentivising electric cars and hybrids. And what that means is that very soon there'll be a shortage of good diesel vehicles on the used market. Important to preserve it, and the easiest way to do that is simply to perform an oil change. So in today's video I'm going to show you how to change the oil on your Mark 7 or 7.5 2-litre diesel Golf, but this guide should equally apply to other vehicles from the Volkswagen Group with transverse engines of roughly the same age, such as Volkswagen Passat, Audi A3, Seat Leon, Skoda Octavia and Skoda Superb. But before we get started, let me just remind you guys how you can support the channel. The easiest way to do that is simply to subscribe. YouTube is going through some weird changes at the moment that are really affecting medium to small channels. It looks like bigger channels are mopping up all the views, and YouTube are happy to push people in those directions, and people like me and some of the channels I follow are really suffering and questioning the viability of their channels. So if you like a channel, not just mine, and you watch it regularly and you haven't subscribed, then please do so. I'm sure you know how to do that by now. Okay, let's start off then with the oil. So you need 4.6 litres of a 50400 or 50700 approved oil. So that oil standard is set by Volkswagen, and it's the lowest standard you can use on a DPF car. Whether you're running 10,000 miles per year intervals or long life, it makes a difference. It's the same oil. Now, this is made for Volkswagen UK under their Quantum brand by a company called Fuchs. They're a German company. I believe it's made in the UK, but it conforms to all the required standards, and it even meets like Porsche and BMW standards as well. And it's in an eco sort of box which is recyclable, and the inner bag thing is probably recyclable as well, so it's much more eco-friendly than the traditional 5-litre can you get oil in. The filter, this was retail price, online though, probably charging more if you go in store, £5.46 from German, Swedish and French, and it's made by a company called Hengst, who may not be the most common OEM manufacturer, but as you can see they're made by Hella, they're part of the Hella group, and they do actually appear OEM on some German cars, so it's no compromise. It's probably a little bit cheaper than OEM. If you want to go genuine, go genuine. I think on this age and mileage of car, not such an issue. The sump plug, which you really ought to replace because the washer gets crushed and that really forms a seal, is made by Febby Bilstein, and it's a couple of quid online. If you go to your Volkswagen dealer, it's probably 3-4 quid. I've dispensed the oil into this can, which makes it easier to pour, and I put 4.6 litres in there. That's generally as much as you'll need. The factory fill, including filter, is usually pretty accurate, but obviously check afterwards just to make sure. Tools, well, it's pretty easy. I think the best thing to do if you're going to do some DIY mechanicking, and this is the good one to start with, is to get a socket set which will have most of these bits in it. The only thing you might struggle with is 32mm for the oil filter housing. So let's start off then. You need to get the under tray off. The three at the back are bigger, they're T40s, everything else is a T25. So that's what we've got here, just a ratchet and the two Torx. And then that might be for the outer bit of the oil filter casing, but there's an inner bit to drain without making a mess, and that's a 13mm. And then you'll need an extension on the socket to get to that. And then finally, to get the sump plug on and off, a 19mm socket. And ideally, you need a torque wrench, but if you are gentle and know what you're doing, then it's okay not to use one. And that is it. Right, at this point, I have drained the oil because I needed to do that while the car was warm, and setting up for filming takes time, so that's been done. There's no sump plug in, there's no oil in, and I haven't drained the oil filter. So let's start off now then by putting the sump plug in and then replacing the oil filter. Okay, so sump plug, just thread it in by hand to start off with. And then 30 Newton meters. Now you can actually feel when you start crushing the washer, and that's the point where you ought to stop, or slightly after that. So we're waiting for the click, but I can feel the washer crushing about now, so it should be very quick now. There we go, that's done. Okay, so now onto the oil filter. This is the housing for it. So I've undone this loom from this bracket here in front of the gearbox, and then also from this clip here, and then that gives us enough room to get onto the hex bits for the filter. Now in the middle of the 32mm outer one is an inner 13mm nut, which is a drain plug, and that means then you can drain it without making so much mess. So I'm going to go in there with a long extension on the socket and just nip out the 13mm inner section. Okay, it's draining off this hump down here. Okay, we'll just leave that to drain now. Okay, with most of the oil out of the filter housing, we're now going to get on the main section with a 32mm socket. Okay, let's finish this off by hand. Let's work it past the loom. And now the filter element. Okay, let's give this area a good clean. And then give the edge of the filter housing a wipe, just to make sure there's nothing on there that's going to stop it sealing when you refit it. If you've got some brake cleaner handy, just give the whole area a spray to get rid of any oil or residue, and then you know if you get a leak in the future, you know it wasn't there before. Okay, so this is the oil filter housing, and as you can see, it does say Hengst on there. So even though this was the cheapest filter, it's actually the same match as what's on the housing, so that's cool. Now there are two O-rings we need to replace. One of them is a big one on the outside of the oil filter housing. You probably can't see it. For that you need a flat blade screwdriver, which I forgot to mention earlier. So we'll just pop that off, and don't confuse it with the new one. And that goes straight into place. So there's a section that's wider than the thread that the O-ring goes onto, and then the other one must be for, and it's probably a good idea, the bit you remove to drain the oil. Yeah, so on there's a tiny little O-ring. Again, you probably can't see it because it's black on black, but let's just pop that off. There you go, put that down there so we don't confuse it, and now you can see what it looks like without the O-ring. And then I've lubricated both of these O-rings before fitting, just to make sure they don't snag. And then we have to fit this into the oil filter housing. We can do it off the car. Now this does not need a lot of torque because it's plastic on plastic. It's apparently 5 Newton meters. So I've actually had to change torque wrench to get to use one that's works that low. So that's this one. That's definitely 5 Newton meters. Yeah, so 30mm socket, and then it shouldn't take an awful lot of effort for this to click. That's it. So yeah, don't overdo that because that would be very bad indeed. Okay, so new O-rings on there. We can slot the filter in. Right, which is that way around. So there are these little clips in there that clip into the filter housing. Now we just need to get that on the car and torque it up to 25 Newton meters, which it should stay on here. Yeah, 25.5 and 5.2 it says for the inner one. So yeah. Okay, so lovely and clean down here, ready for the new filter. Just try not to get any dirt on it as you get it into position. Which actually it came out the other way around. Okay, so that's hand tight now, so we just need to wait for the click. There we go, 25 Newton meters. So that is all the work done down here, apart from reclipping the loom into position. Like so, and then on the bracket by the gearbox, and that is that. Okay, so I won't bore you with the refitting of the under tray, that's pretty self-explanatory. Just start at the back with the 3 bolts to suspend it, and then put the other 6 and 7 actually in after that. So oil, we've got a reasonably big filler hole, so you don't need a funnel, but if you've got one, use it. And you may not spill it then, just like I have done. Okay, now it's time to start the engine, and then after that we can get an idea of what the dipstick says. Just leave it to run for 30 seconds or so to get the oil flowing around the engine, and then turn it off. It's a good time to have a cursory look for leaks as well. Okay, so the longer you leave it the better now, but about a minute should be okay, give you a rough idea of the level. The biggest mistake is to overfill it, because that's a lot harder obviously to rectify than to top up. So let's dip the stick, and yeah, it's most of the way up the dipstick, so that's a good fill. Okay, now we need to reset the service reminder, and the good news is you don't need any diagnostic equipment at all to do that. All you need to do then is hold the 0.0 button down in the middle of the instrument cluster, start the ignition. Within a second it says reset oil service release, and then press again, and service interval reset. If you want to just double check it's worked, go into car on the infotainment system settings, and then service, and then oil change in 9,400 miles or 365 days. That's a translation of 15,000 kilometers, which is the official sort of German interval. So yeah, job done. Okay, well that's your GTD's engine preserved for another sort of 10,000 miles. The most important thing to do though, if you DIY service, is to make a note of what you've done. Keep the receipts, write everything down, dates, mileage, amount of oil, type of oil, and put it in a spreadsheet if you can, and that will then look really good to the next owner. They're not that valuable cars now because they're getting on a bit, so it's not really too much of a problem, but it's really important you keep proof of it. I've been faced with some perfect cars that have been serviced by people, but they've just not kept the paperwork. I haven't been able to buy them. If you don't do that, it's a false economy servicing it yourself, because you'll devalue your car. As ever guys, hope you have enjoyed this Volks Wizard video. Keep subscribing, do keep commenting, and I'll see you for the next one very soon.